Hey guys, Captain Dylan Hubbard here at Hubbards Marina with some red grouper fishing tips. You want to get out there and catch some red grouper? Definitely longer range trips are going to be your best bet. The 12-hour extreme, the 39-hour, the 44-hour, one of those long range private fishing charters on the Flying Hub 2, 8, 10, 12 hours. You can get them on a 10-hour trip on the Hub, 10-hour private charter on the Hub, or maybe even a 12-hour trip too. You might have a shot for them on a 10-hour all day, but we're not going to get a ton of them, right? A lot of times, especially in cooler months on the 10-hour all day, we're fishing a little shallower, targeting those hogfish. But later months, warmer months, you definitely have a little bit better shot as we're fishing deeper on that 10-hour all day, targeting those lanes and catching a few of those red grouper. But if you want to get some big fat red grouper, you got to go deep, 120 foot or more, and that's our longer range specialty trips of those long range private charters. Now, we are doing well on those red grouper overall. We're generally catching them and seeing them best with those bigger dead baits or bigger live baits. As far as live bait is concerned, a squirrel fish, a pinfish, a pigfish, virtually anything works really well. My favorites are a squirrel fish or sand perch, maybe even a lizard fish if those come up. You can also butterfly those fish. You can use a butterfly gray snapper, a butterfly porgy. Really good options for those big fat red grouper. Big dead baits like cut bonita strips, mackerel, virtually anything that's real oily is going to attract those red grouper. Red grouper are scavengers. They're out there over that area of flat, hard bottom generally. They're adjacent to bait schools. We're hunting them starting at about 70, 80, 90 foot. You can start seeing them pretty good. We start to see more bigger ones as you approach 100 foot. Then once you're past 120, that's when you start to see the big, truly fat red grouper. 160, 180, 190, up to 200. We really see some really nice big red grouper. Now, generally, those bigger dead baits, you're using a hook size that matches your bait size, right? So if you're using a big bait, you want to use a bigger hook. If you're using a smaller bait, you want to use a smaller hook. So, for example, on a 10-hour trip, we're not going to be fishing all that deep, maybe up to 100 foot. So I'd be using maybe like a 6, 7-aught hook and a pretty decent sized bait. But on a 39-hour, on a 12-hour extreme, on a 44-hour, we're fishing a lot deeper, closer to 120 plus, up to 200 foot. We're going to use a much bigger bait and a bigger hook, like a 10-aught hook with a big old chunk of dead bait. And with red grouper, they're unlike the gags, right? They're not going to take you down into that rock and try to break you off. A lot of times red grouper are going to be moving over a flat area of hard rock bottom, so they're not going to really cut you off. You don't have to use the big, heavy, overdone leaders. Near shore, around 80, 90, 100 foot up to about 120, 60-pound leader, 50 or even 50, 60, maybe 80-pound leader is all you need. Fishing deep water with bigger hooks, bigger baits, possibly a bigger fish, you want to use a little heavier leader. 60 about the minimum, but really about 80 is good. Now keep in mind, if gag grouper is open too, you might want to use that 100-pound leader or 125-pound leader, because there's a good chance you drop that big dead bait or that live bait down, you might hook that gag grouper, and you're going to need that extra leader capacity and heavier duty reel with a larger drag capacity to land that gag if you do happen to hook one while you're targeting those red groupers. So keep that in mind. If gag season is open, you want to use a little bit bigger, heavier duty, beefier tackle. But if gag grouper season isn't open, tackling down is going to give you more bites, more action, and a better chance of those red groupers. So definitely think like a fish. They're scavengers. You need something to attract their attention. Smellier, oilier baits are really good options. They also love octopus, whole squid, really good options. Bonita strips are one of my favorites. You could use a whole thread fin with the tail cut. The little trick we use is the little smorgasbord, right? You put a whole thread fin with the tail cut on, and then put a little strip of squid on there too. You can use like a 4, 6, 8-inch strip of squid with that thread fin. But remember, two baits, they're going to separate underwater and it's going to spin. So if you're dropping something like that down, you got to put more pressure on that reel with your thumb and drop it much slower to bottom, because you don't want that spinning on the way down and tangling up your main line on the way to bottom, because then it's not going to be presented naturally. You're not going to have as good of a chance at those big red grouper. Also remember, if you're dropping down a big dead bait, you're gonna have a lot of small fish there pecking at it. So when you drop it down to bottom, you do wanna drop it down a little slower, prevent that tangle to the bottom. Once you get to bottom, you wanna make sure you just leave it still for about a minute. If you don't get a bite or a nibble in that first minute, lift your rod tip up real slowly and drop it back down to bottom real slowly. And what you're doing is stretching out that leader. Sometimes your bait will fall to bottom and your lead falls right next to it or even on top of it. So when you lift your rod tip up real slowly, you're lifting that lead up and the current's gonna help you straighten out that leader. Then when you drop your rod tip real slowly back down to bottom, now your bait is fully separated away from your lead. It's a much more natural presentation. Then sit there and wait. You gotta be patient because those grouper, they're smarter fish, they're a little less aggressive, they're not gonna come up there and start hammering your bait right away unless it's a really good bite. So you gotta be a little bit more patient. If you feel those small nibbles, don't try to set the hook on those small nibbles. A lot of times you're gonna have those little fish come in and start pecking right away, and that big grouper is doing circles waiting for that opportune moment. So a little bit of the small nibbles, just let it sit. You're waiting for that big bite to set the hook and put the hammer down. So keep that in mind, use some patience, and definitely tackle up a little bit. You'll have a great shot at a fat red grouper. Check us out Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. for a chance to win free trips and for a chance to learn more about fishing tips, tricks, and more. Our live show is every Sunday night at 7:30 p.m. Off the Hook with Captain Hubbard. You don't want to miss it. You got a chance to learn what's going on now, what's coming up, chance to ask questions, and a chance to win free trips. We'll see you every Sunday night at 7:30 p.m. and hopefully we'll see you out here on the water. Because don't forget, if you're too busy to go fishing, you're just too darn busy.